I can still hear my dad say, as we walk through the woods hunting or on a journey together, "Slow down, son. Slow down." I think he was onto something there. He knew that when you hurry and you get in a hurry, you can miss what God's up to. And welcome to Inspiring Courageous Faith. I'm Dennis Rainey, your host, and this is a YouTube channel that really is designed to give you and those closest to you the courage you need in life's most important relationships: God, your friendships, marriage, relating to your children. So as we start today, I want to ask you a couple of questions. What are you facing right now that is creating stress and pressure in your life, in your marriage, in your family? What fears or concerns are you encountering that demand courage and faith right now? Maybe it's circumstances that you feel are just nearly out of control, if not out of control. If that's what you're feeling, I've got some time-tested practical help that will help you do a better job of managing pressure in your most important relationships. It was the summer of 1971 when I was a single guy and had very little responsibilities, I might add, and thus had the time to be able to go to the Holy Land on a tour hosted by Dallas Theological Seminary. The professor in charge of the trip was Dr. Bruce Waltke. He was professor, I believe, at that time of Old Testament. I think he was a double PhD. All I know is I was amazed at his brilliance and his mind, and I was enjoying him thoroughly. But near the end of the trip, it was hot in Israel, and I decided I'd take a break, go back to the bus, get a water and drink, and just get off my feet for a while. And I went back to the bus, and guess who else was on the bus? Dr. Waltke. And I didn't realize I was about to receive a lesson that would equip me for a lifetime of handling pressure and managing that in my life, my marriage, my family, and work. And even what Dr. Waltke said doesn't sound like it has anything to do with pressure. But trust me, this was golden. I was talking to Dr. Waltke about what he was teaching, and Dr. Waltke said, well, you know, Dennis, you've said you admired my knowledge and all that. He said, but knowledge puffs up and divides people. He said, if you haven't noticed, these guides who are assisting us from here in Israel are threatened by my knowledge of their country. And he said it's that way back at the seminary. Professors kind of get puffed up and can debate and compete with one another. And he said, knowledge can divide. He said, but wisdom, listen to me, wisdom edifies. It unites because wisdom is skill in everyday living. It's godly skill in everyday living. And that's what the Scripture's all about, he said. And he began to explain how the word wisdom came from some Hebrew context that actually talked about taking the raw components of rock or metal and in skillful hands turning something of magnificent design that was created by the one who shaped it. And he talked about how that's what God does in our lives, and that the Bible that he'd been speaking about on this trip, the Bible takes all the raw components of life and helps us apply it to our lives and make sense out of what we're experiencing. And he said, and I want to emphasize this, I know I mentioned it earlier, he said, wisdom is godly skill in everyday living. It's doing life God's way. And I hadn't thought of this passage when he told me that. But it wasn't long after that I had somebody recommend this passage for me as when I did get married, and it puts it all together. Proverbs 24, 3 and 4. It says, by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. And by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Wisdom takes the raw components of life and in our hands, under God's leadership, in the power of His Holy Spirit, He guides us in putting those things together to live out the life that God has for us in a way that honors Him. There's some other passages, though, I've got to read to you about wisdom that are worth mentioning right now. Psalm 111, verse 10, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All those who practice it have a good understanding. Proverbs 1:7 says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 through 17, it says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. The Bible helps us get our expectations about God straight. That's what wisdom is. It straightens out our view of life, how it was intended to be lived as God designed it. And also, it straightens us out about our own lives and how it can guide us, how it can protect us in building our marriages and families. It preserves us, keeps us from evil and sin, which can destroy us. Ecclesiastes 7:19 is another great passage. Wisdom gives strength to the wise man, more than 10 rulers who are in the city. It strengthens us and gives us the character to handle the storms of life. And those storms create pressure in our lives, our marriages, our families. So how do we receive this wisdom? Where do we get it? If you want to know how to live as God designed us to live, how can you be a wise person that is applying the Scriptures to their lives? And the first thing it points out in Proverbs chapter 2, and I'm not going to read all of the verses there, but Proverbs chapter 2 talks about how we are to seek her as you would silver. It talks about wisdom crying out in the street and says, listen to me, listen up. I'm life. This is how you do life as God designed it. If you want to know how to do wisdom, take a look at James chapter 1, verses 2 through 5. And it talks about when you encounter trials. It says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials of all kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Well, if you want to get wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in how you build your home, your marriage, your family, your life, then you need to be crying out to wisdom in the street. And get in this book and read it daily, asking God to help give you wisdom. So the first thing we're to do is to seek wisdom. Seek God and ask Him to give us skill in everyday living as we get in His book, the Bible. There's a second way we receive wisdom and do life, and that's through creative solitude. A story that illustrates this may not sound like it relates to what we're doing here, but it really does. It's the Buffalo River in the Ozarks. If you've ever been on that stream, you know that it is a really beautiful stream that cuts through the Ozarks in S shapes all the way through the limestone cliffs, some of them 300 feet high. And the water is not really dangerous at all, although there's a couple of points where you have some current that can tip over your canoe if you're canoeing through there. And the spot that always gets people is called Gray Rock. And I watched Gray Rock eat a lot of rookie canoe enthusiasts over the years. Barbara and I didn't go through with the herd of rookies. We pulled our canoe off to the side and said, let's just watch how they go through this and see if we can't determine how best to do it ourselves. So we pulled off our canoe, walked on the gravel bar up, and just sat down on the gravel bar and watched what happened as people encountered gray rock. Well, it was fascinating because what you have to do is you have to point your canoe head straight at the rock and then turn the back of the canoe so that it twists the front out like this in the current, and it just pushes you past the rock. Those who don't do that tip over, and there's all kinds of glasses, rod and reels underneath gray rock that you can find if you had the equipment to get it. But gray rock has taken its toll. And I think what it points out is the way you do life is you take a step back and use some solitude to really see what's happening in life. I love what Thomas Merton said. He placed a premium on solitude. He said, you can't just drift along passively in the stream of the world, allowing its values, pressures, and all to shape our lives and our kids well. It's not going to happen. It'll shape you in the wrong direction. Thomas Edison said, the best thinking has been done in solitude. The worst has been done in the midst of turmoil. That's why one of my tips I'll give you in handling pressure, if you're married, is that you need to slow down and bring your spouse on board and go through the pressure times together and seek their advice and their counsel and the best way to handle it. I want to read you some quotes that are about solitude that I ran across that I thought it'd be worth passing on to you. Carl Sandburg said, one of the greatest necessities in America is to discover creative solitude. George Bernard Shaw said, few people think more than 2 or 3 times a year. I've made an international reputation for myself by thinking once or twice a day, just pondering and looking around. Kent Ruth made a really fascinating statement about the idea of creative solitude and thinking. He said, men can live without air for a few minutes, without water for about 2 weeks, without food for 2 months, and without a new thought for years on end. I really like that. When a Christian doesn't stop and think about what he's doing, he can fill his life with all kinds of activity and be driven by the needs of others. As a result, under all kinds of pressure. He might miss the voice of God in the midst of his activity. He might become unbalanced. He can think bigger is better. He might fail to develop convictions, character, and a private inner self as he encounters life. He might end up, instead of being a follower of Jesus, a follower of the culture. And rather than being creative and innovative, he might be a copycat. As a boy, I can still hear my dad say, as we walk through the woods hunting or on a journey together, slow down, son, slow down. Now, that was over 65 years ago. His voice still echoes in my mind as a teenager. Slow down, son. Slow down. I think he was onto something there. He knew that when you hurry and you get in a hurry, you can miss what God's up to. His wisdom today fuels my soul. John Ortberg, a pastor in California, has written a great book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. That may need to be a mantra for the next 12 months for you, your marriage, and your family. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian dissident who spent I don't know how many years in a Russian prison, wrote this. Hang with me on this quote, but it's really good. And it was only when I lay there on rotting prison straw that I sensed within myself the first stirrings of good. Gradually, it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes through not states, nor between classes, nor political parties, but right through every human heart. All the writers who wrote about prison, but did not themselves serve time there, were considered in their day to express sympathy for prisoners and to curse prison. I, however, have served enough time there. I nourished my soul there. And I can say without hesitation, listen carefully, he said, "Bless you, prison, for having been in my life." It was there that he came to grips with who God is and ultimately became a follower of Jesus Christ. You know, this statement by Thomas Kelly makes a lot of sense to me. People today take time far more seriously than they do eternity. They ought to be thinking about where they're going to spend eternity, not just time. Creative solitude can be where we find additional ways of discovering God and wisdom. And there's a third thing I wanted to impress on you today, and that is to establish margin in your life, marriage and family, so that you might be able to handle the pressures that come at you. Margin is white space in the calendar. It's in your day, perhaps in your phone. Time to think. Some guardrails that give you room to maneuver, where you're not always backed up against the goal line playing defense. One of the things about developing margin is you must decide where you must win and where you refuse to fail. Build in the margin into your life that anticipates how you're going to achieve those objectives. I want to illustrate what I'm talking about here. I've got a picture of my family. This is really why I do what I do. This is a number of years ago, obviously. Matter of fact, it was about 30 years ago, maybe more. Barbara's not here to correct me. She will be soon, though. This family created a lot of pressure. And so when Barbara and I were scheduling things in our lives, we learned that if you could give yourself some space out here around what you're doing to anticipate those things that you couldn't possibly predict, they can happen, but they don't knock the book off the table. But if you constantly schedule at the brink on just hoping you can get by, and you're constantly on the edge, something happens. I just remember when that thought occurred to me, I've got to give us some room for the emergencies with 8 human beings in our family, 6 children and Barbara and me. My dad talked to me when I was a boy about slowing down. That created some margin that I needed because I only knew one speed. I can still hear his voice today. When Barbara and I were raising our children, we ran across a book called The Disappearance of Childhood. It had a big impact on Barbara, and then she had a big impact on me. But it was the idea of we were forcing our kids to grow up more rapidly than we should have, and that we needed to protect them and allow them to have a childhood experience and not try to move them on to adulthood too quickly. 3 disciplines have really anchored us as a couple as we raised our family. The first was dinner time. It's kind of a lost art in our culture. A dinner time is a time that unplugs all media. There's no phones there, no TV, and it just allows for relationships, questions, sharing about your day, talking about your high for the day, talking about your low for the day, and allowing the adults and the children to truly interact with each other as well as kids with each other. Now, granted, Our dinner time had lots of spilled milk, had lots of squabbles and sibling rivalry, but that's all a part of life as well. A second discipline we had, Barbara and I had a date night every week. I think I've mentioned this on some previous episodes, but we had a date night that we didn't skip. In fact, if we did skip a date night, our kids might come to us, especially if we missed a couple of days in a row. They would come to us and say, "Mom, Dad, you guys okay? You did okay?" We actually had a waitress where we used to go. It was our favorite place. She came to us after we'd missed about a month because we'd been on vacation and said, "I want to make sure you guys, your marriage is okay, your family's okay." We said, "Sure, we're in good shape." But those weekly date nights were a time where we pulled out our calendars and we went after our values being applied on those calendars vigorously. That's where we hammered out how we did life. A couple of times a year, Barbara and I would have a getaway, probably 2, maybe 3 nights, getting away from the kids to give them a break, give us a break. And we'd go out of town, spend the night in a nice hotel or maybe in a cabin. And we would do an inventory of all the things we were doing and all the activities we had going on. And we just kind of graded ourselves. How we doing? How are our relationships going? It was a chance for Barbara and me to establish some guardrails together as a couple and think in complete sentences and paragraphs as we hammered out those values to lead our kids. It was during those getaways that we established some guardrails to protect our marriage and our family. Like, for instance, I agreed with Barbara that I would not accept a speaking engagement and travel without her and the kids unless I'd talked to her previously and had her agreement. We talked about saying no and the power of the word no. And I got to tell you, that was liberating in our marriage as we sought to control pressure in our family because other people think they know what you need. And we may not need, as a big family, all the social activities that other people may have the margin to be able to enjoy. Then we would, as we looked at the calendar, we would take a look at those times during the year that were the busiest. And we would establish the margin as we entered into those periods like May, like December, around the holidays. And we just talked about all the activity and the exhaustion factor that occurs because of all that activity. We also talked about what is seemingly 2 opposite things, but they both are deadly. One is adversity. The other is prosperity. Thomas Carlyle said, "For every 100 people who can handle adversity, I can only show you 1 who can handle prosperity." I think there's a great need in America because of the power of materialism for our families to recalibrate and reorient themselves around what's important from the Bible and talk about what you're going to say no to and what you'll do going forward. In closing, I think what I'd like to challenge you to do is to take a walk. Maybe it's just you alone, or maybe it's with your spouse, and just apply one of the things you learned from this podcast. And I'd like to challenge you to ponder. The book of Ecclesiastes is a great book. In fact, it's a book you ought to read as you just evaluate how you're going to do life and how you're going to run the race that you're engaged in. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the preacher has all these things that are troubling him. And he says, "And then I pondered," or "then I stopped and thought, and I discovered, I came to a conclusion. I got some wisdom, knowing how to make it work." Here's what I want you to ponder. Ponder what your world is doing to you. Ponder what you are doing to your world. Is peer pressure winning? A second batch of questions. Ponder and reflect on God's promises, that He'll be there with us, that He will not abandon us to go through tough times by ourselves. Are your values and priorities in line with the Scripture? Any areas of disobedience? How about your direction in life? Where will you be when you turn 50? When you turn 70? When you turn 80? Talk about that. Talk about your convictions and your commitments. Do they reflect your true values? And then just ponder the state of your life, the general state of your life. The third area that you need to ponder is ponder the resources that God's given you. This is good to get out of the rut and just evaluate and be reminded of how much you do have as an American. Your personality, your training, education, your traits, the family you came from, the spiritual gifts you have, the opportunities that have been afforded you. Just ponder those. And then ponder what God expects of me from my relationships, in my job, and in my church. And finally, number 5, ponder new vistas. Dream together. Talk about new territories. Don't get in a rut. Maybe you heard the phrase, there was a sign on the Alaskan highway, choose your rut carefully, you'll be in it for the next 200 miles. Life is not a good thing to be in a rut and live your entire life there. Talk about some adventures you'd like to go on and experience together. Add some zest and vitality. And maybe for some of you, you've had all the zest and vitality you can handle. You'd rather take a nap and where you're going to go to rest. Ponder how you might do that. I want to thank you for tuning in. Hope you'll subscribe, pass this on to somebody else, maybe offer a word of encouragement, what you got out of it. And I hope you'll join us again for another episode of Inspiring Courageous Faith. I'm Dennis Rainey. I want to thank you for spending this time with me. God bless.
Go to therainey's.org/podcast for more inspiring courageous faith content.